And how Satoshi created Bitcoin was that the more people who are mining Bitcoin, the harder the puzzle is to solve it. And I talk about that in the What is Bitcoin section about the puzzle and how that's solved. But the point I want to make here is the difficulty had gotten harder such that you had to use a dedicated graphics card. And that's what he was pitching to me. So I had to say no. So I wasn't ready to buy Bitcoin or mine it at that point, but the seed had been planted and I was really curious to know more. And especially what was unique was my friend wasn't a really excitable person like I was. So to hear him so excited and passionate about something, I knew that it was for real, because that's not normally him. And so I dedicated to learning as much as I could. I spent countless hours, probably in those first couple of years, hundreds of hours learning as much as I could, going over the little information I did have, watching things repeatedly. And I watched Bitcoin from the sidelines. I saw it fluctuate from, less than $1 to over $1 to a couple dollars. I think at the most it got at one point was about $10 or $15. Man, gosh, that's so low just to think about now. There weren't a lot of people talking about Bitcoin at that time. There was one guy, however, his name was Rick Falkvinge. I think you pronounce his name Rick Falkvinge. I'll say Rick Falkvinge, so forgive me, Rick. Falkvinge is a Swedish tech entrepreneur and author who started his own political party in Sweden called the Swedish Pirate Party. The guy is really, really smart, probably a genius, and he's been ahead of his time for a long time, even before he did what I'm about to tell you. There were 3 articles in 2011 that really impacted me. The first was on May 11th, 2011, called "With the Napster of Banking Around the Corner, Bring Out Your Popcorn." And here is a quote from that article. "History so far tells us that it takes about 10 years from conception of a technology or an application of technology until somebody hits the magic recipe in how to make that technology easy enough to use that it catches on. And when it does, boy, does it catch on. It took 10 years for the music industry to become easy enough to wildfire, as he calls it, courtesy of Napster. It took video sharing 10 years to become easy enough to wildfire." So if you want a crystal ball of the next battle, look at what many techies are doing right now, but that's obscure and hasn't caught on. Something that has a very clear and attractive use case once it becomes easy enough. Here's what's on my radar: banking. There's at least a dozen different variants of decentralized cryptographic currencies and transaction systems out there, very sophisticated and totally incomprehensible. There's Ripple, Bitcoin, eCash, and others. Up until now, from the perspective of governments, it's only been some friends complaining about a sales slump of CDs, so governments have given them some legislative breadcrumbs to shut up. How do you think governments across the world are going to react when they realize they lost the ability to tax the public? So that's part of that article, and I'd encourage you to read it if you want, especially because of how far ahead he was of his time. But there was another article that stood out for me too. It was about 8 days later on May 19th, 2011, called "The Information and Policy Case for Flat Tax and Basic Income." The aha moment you experience when you transfer a few bit cents to somebody on the other side of the planet and they have it instantly without any single being knowing that you just sent that money or that the receiver got it, and with no single being able to stop you from doing the transaction with anything less than physical restraint in your home, that feeling is profound, as are the ramifications. And then finally, May 29th, 2011, I won't read any excerpts from this because I already did the other ones, but this one, it was entitled "Why I'm Putting All My Savings into Bitcoin." It's a really great article. So just think about this. This guy put all his savings into Bitcoin back then. And this was so helpful for me during that time because I needed to understand what Bitcoin was and why it mattered. Those were the 2 biggest questions. What is this thing? Why does it matter? What is this thing? Why does it matter? Because people are starting, some of the people I was following are starting to really get involved in this or really, build up some steam, and people were talking about it. Very, very few people. It was on the fringes, of course. And between Falkvinge and my best friend, who also happens to be really, really bright and a really great teacher, things started to fall in place in my brain. Things started to click. The single biggest factor that motivated me to invest in Bitcoin was to provide a better life for me and my family. And as I continued to learn, I became convinced that the cost of ignoring Bitcoin was worth more than the benefit of how much it would be worth it if it ever took off. I was convinced that the cost of ignoring benefit was less than the benefit of how much I would get if it ever took off. So the benefit heavily outweighed the cost, in my opinion. They call that a cost benefit analysis. The second major reason for getting into Bitcoin is because I lost almost all faith, if not all faith, in the government, the US government, after the decision to bail out the banks in 2008. This will take a little longer to explain, but it's important. It's a significant moment in my life, and it came in the fall of 2008. At that time, I was in IT sales, selling hardware and software and services. And I remember the day that the bailout was passed. I don't know if you do too. I was cold calling in Portsmouth, Virginia, and it was late morning. The stock markets had already crashed, and Congress was scrambling to do something to stop the bleeding, both locally and globally. It was early October, and overnight they approved bailing out the banks with a $700 billion relief package, which at that time was an unheard of amount of money. Today, not so much.